The mountain roared like a living thing, wind clawing at the timber walls as snow hurled itself against the glass. The lodge door shuddered under a brutal thud, then another, a heavy body testing the hinges. Claire Dawson gripped the quilt, breath breaking in short bursts as another contraction seized her. Outside, over the storm's scream, a second sound rose. Evelyn's voice, sharp and frantic, pounding the porch. "Open this door. That baby belongs to our family." The handle rattled. Wood groaned. Claire's eyes found Ethan's. Fear lived there, but so did a vow. Ethan Ward moved like a shield between Claire and the door, one hand on the old rifle, the other reaching back to steady her. "Breathe with me," he said, calm, slicing through the chaos. The grizzly's weight slammed again, a bone-deep thump that shook the frame. From the window, the night was a blur of white and pine, a world erased. Evelyn beat the panels with gloved fists, voice cracking. "Claire, do not let that man steal our blood." Claire flinched, more from the words than the weather. Another wave of pain rolling low and fierce. Luke's voice joined from outside, closer to panic than threat. "Please, Claire, she is freezing. Let us in." The plea collided with a guttural scrape as claws raked across the wood. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured, never turning from the door. He could feel the hinge pins complaining, the old cedar flexing with each hit. He counted Claire's breaths, slow and steady, as if his voice could build a wall the storm could not cross. The fire popped. Shadows leapt. Everything narrowed to pulse and promise. Another contraction gripped Claire, deeper, heavier, the kind that bent the world in half. She bit her lip, tasted copper, and whispered, "He is coming." Ethan set the rifle within reach, fingers already at the bolt, mind split between the feral outside and the miracle inside. "Look at me," he said, and she did. In his eyes she saw a harbor, and in that harbor she anchored. The door jolted so hard the iron latch squealed. Claire cried out. The storm answered, for a heartbeat. Even the fire held its breath. Then, through wind, fists, and claws, a single sound cut cleanly across the night, a fierce, unmistakable cry that did not belong to bears or blizzards or bitter women. Claire's voice broke into a laugh that was half sob, half victory. Evelyn went silent on the porch. Luke froze. Ethan swallowed hard, a tear hot on skin gone cold. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, hand finding Claire's. "They called you Barren." He squeezed, a promise sealing. But the mountain just heard a mother. "What happens next will change the town forever. Stay with me." The quiet of Pine Ridge had never been kind to Claire Dawson. In the town's single church, her wedding had been whispered about like a mercy, a desperate union meant to cure her barrenness. A year later, those same pews murmured again when Matt Collins left her, pushed by his mother's pride and the cruel verdict of the town doctor. "Some women just aren't meant for motherhood," he had said, his words cutting deeper than any scalpel. Claire carried that sentence like a scar no one could see. When she walked through the market, talk followed her like smoke. At home, things were worse. Her mother, Evelyn, polished her reputation like silver and saw Claire as a stain that would not come clean. Her father, Rick, drowned his guilt in debt and silence, while Luke, her older brother, kept his eyes down whenever Evelyn's tongue turned sharp. They spoke of responsibility, but what they meant was burden. On the night the truth came out, Claire sat at their worn pine table, hands folded in her lap, and listened as her father's voice broke. "He offered money," he said, "enough to clear what we owe." She frowned, not understanding, until Evelyn's smile explained everything. They called it an arrangement. A reclusive man in the mountains needed help around his lodge. Someone to cook, clean, keep him company. "Company," Evelyn repeated, as if the word could disguise the ugliness beneath. Claire felt the room tilt. "You sold me?" she whispered. Her brother flinched. Rick looked at the floor. Evelyn only adjusted her shawl. "You'll have food, shelter, and a roof over your head. That's more than this town ever gave you." The weight of the small leather pouch of coins on the table was louder than any apology. That night, the snow started early, fine and cold, and Claire packed her few things: a worn dress, a Bible that wasn't hers, and the last of her pride. Luke was the one ordered to take her up the trail. Neither spoke much. The path narrowed, trees closing in like sentries. By the time they reached the clearing, the world smelled of pine and smoke. The lodge rose from the white silence, solid and still, a slice of warmth carved into the cold. On the porch, a tall man sat sharpening a hunting knife, the steel flashing in the dying light. When he looked up, Claire expected the madness the town had promised. Instead, she found calm, eyes the color of the sky after a storm, blue and steady. "You must be Claire," he said. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being alone. Luke muttered that the deal was done and stepped back into the trees, leaving her there with the man called Ethan Ward. She stood frozen, her breath a cloud between them. Ethan didn't move closer. He simply held open the door. "It's cold," he said. "Come inside." And with that, the woman the town had thrown away crossed the threshold into a life she never saw coming. But what he said next would undo everything she thought she knew about mercy. Inside, warmth hit her like a soft wave, fire crackling in a stone hearth, the scent of pine resin and meat stew drifting through the air. The cabin wasn't what she imagined. No bones, no trophies, no chaos, only order and care. A wide wooden table, a bed made with clean wool blankets, shelves lined with books and tools. Ethan set down his knife, wiped his hands, and poured 2 bowls of stew. "You should eat," he said simply. His tone wasn't commanding, but matter-of-fact, as if her comfort were an ordinary thing. Claire hesitated before sitting. Her legs still trembled from the climb, from everything she'd lost on the way up. They ate in silence, the fire snapping between them. She studied his face, the angles of a man who'd lived both hardship and solitude. There were scars along his forearms, the kind born from work, not violence. He didn't stare at her the way men in town used to, measuring her worth against gossip. He simply noticed her. After a while he asked, "They tell you why I live up here?" She nodded. "They said you're a recluse, that you lost your family." He gave a dry laugh, more exhale than sound. "They tell you I'm insane too." Claire swallowed. "Some did." His gaze met hers. "You'll find I'm mostly quiet, not crazy." Then his voice dropped lower, almost a confession. "I didn't bring you here to serve me, Claire. I don't need a maid." That stunned her. The spoon froze halfway to her lips. "Then why?" she asked. He looked into the fire before answering. "Because loneliness eats a man alive. I didn't buy a servant. I asked for someone to talk to before the silence finished the job." The honesty in his tone struck something deep inside her, a chord she hadn't realized still existed. Her heart, starved for gentleness, stuttered once in disbelief. Later he showed her where she could sleep. The bed, he insisted, was hers. "I'll stay by the fire tonight," he said, spreading an extra blanket on the floor. She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in her bones spoke louder than pride. When she lay down, the warmth of the furs wrapped around her like forgiveness. For the first time in years, her last thought before sleep wasn't shame or fear, but safety. Outside, the wind prowled against the logs. Inside, Ethan's steady breathing was the only sound. The mountain, the man, and the woman no one wanted. 3 broken things sharing one fragile peace. But peace never stays long in the wild, and what began as survival would soon turn into something neither of them expected. Morning came with pale gold light spilling through the frosted window. Claire woke to the smell of coffee and the low hum of a man humming an old tune. Ethan stood near the hearth, stirring something in a cast-iron pot, his hair damp from melted snow. For a moment she watched him, the rhythm of his movements calm, deliberate. He noticed her eyes and offered a small smile, shy, almost boyish, that faded as quickly as it came. "There's breakfast," he said. "You'll need strength up here. The air takes more from you than you realize." She thanked him softly, her voice unsure of what gratitude sounded like after so long being silenced. Days unfolded in a quiet rhythm that neither of them planned. He rose before dawn to check his traps, returned with game or firewood, and spent hours mending the tools that kept their small world running. Claire found her hands craving purpose. She scrubbed, swept, and cooked, but soon began to add little touches. Wildflowers in a chipped jar, a curtain stitched from spare cloth, order where emptiness once reigned. Ethan never stopped her. Sometimes he'd pause in his work to watch her rearrange something and nod, as if approving a silent language only they understood. Their conversations were brief at first. Weather, supplies, the stubborn wolves that howled down the valley. But the silences between them changed texture. They weren't heavy anymore. One afternoon, he found her outside, struggling to chop wood, the axe too heavy for her frame. He stepped behind her, his hands covering hers on the handle. "Like this," he murmured. The wood split clean. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. She stepped back quickly, cheeks burning, and he retreated without a word. That night she lay awake, staring at the flicker of firelight, replaying the warmth of his hands. A storm rolled in 2 days later, turning the mountain into a ghostly maze. Thunder cracked like the sky tearing open, and Claire flinched. Ethan looked up from fixing a boot. "You afraid of thunder?" he asked gently. She nodded, embarrassed. "When I was a kid, I used to hide under my mother's quilt." He crossed the room, sat beside her. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low, steady. The next flash of lightning lit his face, not stern, not wild, just human. She realized then how long it had been since anyone had spoken to her as if she mattered. When the thunder rolled again, she leaned closer, almost without thinking. His arm came around her shoulders, hesitant at first, then certain. The storm outside howled. But inside the cabin, something softer began to rise. Trust, fragile as the flame that danced between them. Claire closed her eyes, hearing his heartbeat steady against her ear. For the first time, she didn't feel like a broken promise. She felt alive, seen, and whole. But what happened the next morning would turn that fragile calm into a spark neither could ignore. Dawn crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, painting the room in muted gold. Claire stirred beneath the wool blanket, aware first of warmth, then of sound, the low crackle of the hearth, and somewhere close, Ethan's slow breathing. He'd fallen asleep sitting up beside the fire, boots still on, one arm draped protectively over his knees. For a moment she just watched him, the edges of his face softened by light. There was peace there, an honesty she hadn't known in years. She rose quietly and covered him with an extra blanket. When he blinked awake, surprise flickered in his eyes before giving way to gratitude. "You didn't have to," he said. "You did enough just by staying." The days that followed felt different, charged with something she couldn't name. They laughed more easily, talked longer by the fire. Ethan showed her how to tell time by the sun, how to follow the tracks of deer in fresh snow, how to listen for the shift in wind before a storm. Claire, in turn, taught him the small joys of comfort, how to bake bread with a crust that crackled, how to dry herbs for tea, how to make the cabin smell like home. They were two lives weaving themselves into one quiet rhythm, and yet, beneath the stillness, something pulsed, a current of longing neither dared to touch. One afternoon, while washing vegetables by the stream, Claire's foot slipped on the slick edge of a stone. Before she could fall, Ethan's arms caught her, firm, instinctive. For a heartbeat they stayed that way, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, smell the pine and smoke in his clothes. The world seemed to still, water whispering around their boots. "You okay?" he asked, voice rougher than usual. "Yes," she breathed, though her heart said otherwise. When she stepped back, she could still feel the ghost of his hands at her waist, steady and unyielding. That night, neither of them spoke much. The air inside the cabin was thick with unspoken thoughts. When lightning flashed, Claire jumped. The storm had returned, fiercer this time. Ethan stood and moved closer, his shadow cast long across the floor. "It's just noise," he said gently. "Nothing can hurt you here." But she wasn't afraid of the thunder anymore. She was afraid of how much she wanted him to stay near. Another flash lit the room, and she found herself looking into his eyes, searching, uncertain, yet unwilling to look away. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, fingers trembling slightly. "You don't have to be afraid," he said again, though it wasn't the storm he meant now. And when his hand lingered, when her breath caught in answer, the space between them broke. The kiss came softly, a question, not a demand, and the answer was everything. The wind screamed outside, but in that small cabin on the mountain, something far greater than the storm had begun. But love, once found, has a way of testing those who dare to claim it, and the mountain was not done with them yet. The wind howled like a wounded creature, battering the shutters until they rattled. Claire sat near the fire, her heart racing faster than the storm outside. Every flash of lightning threw Ethan's face into sharp relief, jaw set, eyes soft. He moved toward her, slow and deliberate, as if approaching something sacred. "You're trembling," he whispered. "It's not the cold," she answered, her voice breaking into the truth neither of them had dared to speak aloud. Then the thunder crashed, and the world seemed to vanish, except for the warmth of his hands cupping her face. When he kissed her again, it wasn't hesitation, it was recognition. Two souls finding their way home in the middle of chaos. The fire flickered low, shadows weaving across the walls like memories they no longer feared. Claire felt every scar on his hands as they traced the outline of her shoulders, not claiming but cherishing. His touch wasn't about power or pity, it was discovery, the proof that something inside her still bloomed. She had spent years believing her body was broken, her heart a thing to be ashamed of. But Ethan's voice, quiet, reverent, unmade all of that. "You're not what they said," he murmured. "You never were." Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and liberating. "Then what am I?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Alive." They spoke little after that. Words had become too small. The storm roared and the cabin shook, but inside it was all warmth and breath and light. When at last the thunder faded into a distant murmur, Claire lay in his arms, her cheek against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had guided her through the dark. For the first time since she was cast out of her home, she felt chosen, not because of what she could give, but simply because she was her. Morning crept slow and silver over the mountain. Ethan was already awake, watching her sleep as if afraid she might disappear. When her eyes opened, he smiled, not the shy one she'd seen before, but something deeper. "Good morning," she whispered. "You look different," he laughed quietly. "Maybe I am." She reached out to touch his face, memorizing the warmth of his skin. "You don't regret it?" she asked. "Regret?" he said softly. "Claire last night didn't break anything. It healed what was left." She wanted to believe him. And when he kissed her again, she did. The snow outside glowed brighter, a reflection of the quiet joy taking root between them. They shared breakfast by the fire, still half smiling at every glance. It felt fragile, like something the world might not allow them to keep. But as Ethan reached for her hand across the table, she understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had not destroyed them. It had baptized them. Yet neither of them knew that nature was not the only force waiting to test the miracle now growing inside her. Days turned to weeks, and the mountains softened under winter's retreat. Sunlight filtered through melting icicles, painting the cabin in liquid gold. Claire hummed as she kneaded dough, her body lighter, freer, until the first wave of nausea hit. It was faint at first, a whisper of unease in her stomach gone as quickly as it came. She brushed it off, blaming the altitude or the smoke from the hearth. But then it returned the next morning, sharper, familiar in a way that terrified her. When she looked down at her hands, trembling, flour-dusted, the memory of the word Barren echoed like a curse she could never escape. For days she kept the secret to herself, afraid to name hope aloud. She counted the moons, her mind racing. Could it be? No, it couldn't. The doctor's verdict, her mother's cruelty, the shame she'd carried since her wedding night, all of it said this was impossible. Yet every morning her body betrayed that certainty. Her senses sharpened, her heart beat faster, and one evening, as she sat by the fire, she felt a sudden stillness deep within her. Not emptiness, but presence. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "God," she whispered, "if this is real, don't take it from me." Ethan noticed the change before she said a word. He saw how she paled at the smell of cooking meat, how she pressed a hand to her chest when the air grew too thin. "You're not yourself," he said one night, worry shadowing his face.
She tried to smile.
"I'm fine," but her voice wavered. Finally, unable to hold it anymore, she stepped outside under the cold sweep of starlight. "Ethan," she began, her breath misting, "I need to tell you something, but I don't know how." He followed her gaze to the horizon, patient as the mountains themselves. "Then don't plan it," he said gently. "Just speak." She turned to him, trembling. "I think I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile and impossible. Ethan's expression froze. Disbelief, fear, wonder all colliding. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair, eyes shining in the dim light. "Claire, how?" She laughed through her tears. "I don't know. Maybe love doesn't follow rules." Silence stretched between them, thick and trembling. Then Ethan's breath hitched, and he closed the distance in 2 strides, his hands on her face. "I thought I'd never hear that word again," he whispered. "A child." His voice broke. "After everything I lost, after everything you were told." She pressed her forehead to his, her tears mixing with his own. "It's real, Ethan, I can feel it." His hands slid down to her stomach, tentative, reverent, as if he could already sense the heartbeat beneath. "Then this mountain isn't cursed," he murmured. "It's blessed." He sank to his knees, resting his cheek against her belly, laughter and sobs colliding in one trembling sound. "You've given me back my life," he said. "No," she whispered, running her fingers through his hair. We gave each other a miracle. But miracles have a way of stirring the ghosts who can't stand to see grace born from their cruelty. And soon the past would come knocking. Spring brought color back to the mountains, but peace never lasts where envy breathes. One afternoon, while Ethan mended a fence at the lower ridge, a hunter from Pine Ridge wandered too far from his trail. He spotted smoke curling from the chimney and a figure, Claire, standing in the garden, her hand resting gently on the swell of her stomach. For a moment he froze, unable to believe what he saw. The Barren girl, alive and glowing, living with the man the town called the Mountain Ghost. He turned and ran, heart pounding, back toward gossip, back toward hunger for scandal. By the next morning, Pine Ridge buzzed like a hive struck by a stick. In the bakery, in the church pews, outside the general store, whispers flew faster than the wind. She's alive. She's pregnant. He must have bewitched her. Each rumor twisted the truth further. Evelyn Dawson heard it first while shopping for flour. Her hand clenched the counter until her knuckles whitened. The humiliation she had buried for months erupted anew. Her daughter, the one she'd sold, now flaunting a miracle. To Evelyn it wasn't grace. It was defiance. That night she called her son Luke and spoke with the venom of pride, wounded beyond reason. "She's disgracing us," she hissed. "That man poisoned her mind. We're going to bring her home, and the baby too." Unaware of the gathering storm below, Claire prepared to travel into town with Ethan for the first time since she'd left. They needed flour, salt, fabric, and courage. As she packed, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. "They'll stare," Ethan warned, tightening the strap on his rifle. "Let them," she said, voice firm. "I've hidden long enough." The road down felt shorter this time, not because it was easier, but because she knew who she was walking beside. At the edge of the town, every sound seemed to hush. Faces turned. The whispers began. Children stopped their games. Shopkeepers stood in doorways. The air itself seemed to pause as Claire and Ethan walked side by side down the main street. He tall and weathered, she radiant, beneath a simple blue dress that framed the life she carried. The town that once called her cursed now stared in wordless awe. Then a voice sliced through the silence, Evelyn's, shrill and trembling. "That's impossible." She pushed through the crowd, dragging Luke behind her. "You're Barren. You can't. You lied to us." Claire's chin lifted, calm as the mountain wind. "You sold me, Mother." "The lie wasn't mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's face burned red. "That man bewitched you," she screamed, pointing at Ethan. "You've shamed your family." Claire took a step closer, eyes bright with strength no one had ever seen in her before. "My shame ended the day you sold me. This," she said, resting a hand over her belly, "isn't shame. It's proof that love is stronger than cruelty." Even those who once whispered now looked at her differently. Ethan placed his arm around her, his gaze sweeping over the crowd like a warning. "She's not yours to judge," he said quietly. "And this child isn't your redemption. It's our beginning." Evelyn stumbled back, speechless, while Rick stood frozen behind her, guilt etched into every line of his face. Luke couldn't meet Claire's eyes. The weight of the truth crushed whatever pride their mother had left. For a moment the town was utterly still. Then whispers began again, softer this time, threaded with awe instead of scorn. Claire turned toward Ethan. "Can we go home now?" she asked. He nodded. "Home," he said, and the word carried all the peace neither of them had ever known. But peace, once reclaimed, must always be defended. And the next storm would not come from the sky. For a while, the town's noise faded into memory. Back in their mountain haven, Claire and Ethan found rhythm again, morning sunlight spilling across wooden floors, laughter echoing through the trees, the unborn child a living promise between them. Ethan built a cradle from pine logs and carved its edges with mountain flowers. At night, Claire embroidered a quilt, humming lullabies her grandmother once sang. They spoke little of the confrontation in Pine Ridge, yet beneath the comfort, Ethan sensed something tightening in the air, a silence that didn't belong to nature. Wolves howled closer than usual. Footprints appeared near the stream where none should be. The mountain was restless again. Down in Pine Ridge, restlessness had turned into obsession. Evelyn Dawson couldn't sleep. Every night she replayed the moment her daughter's voice silenced her in front of the town. Her pride had been her armor, and Claire had shattered it. "That child," she whispered into the dark, "that child carries our blood. He belongs to me." Rick tried to reason with her, voice trembling. "Evelyn, leave it. Let her live." She glared at him. "You were always weak. I won't let my grandson rot in a cabin like an animal." And so she began her quiet campaign, feeding Luke the poison of guilt. "You sold her once," she told him. "You'll make it right this time. Bring the baby back. Save what's left of this family." Luke resisted at first, haunted by what he'd done. But Evelyn's words coiled tight around his heart. "She'll die up there," she warned. The child will die with her. Eventually conscience bent beneath her will. He agreed, not out of hate, but of fear, the same fear that had always ruled their house. Together they planned their ascent. "When the snow falls again, the road will be quiet," Evelyn said. "We go then. No one will see." She packed blankets, food, and rope with the precision of madness, her mind already rewriting the story she'd tell the town, that she'd rescued her lost daughter and saved the baby from a savage man. Up on the mountain, the first flakes began to fall. Ethan noticed how often Claire paused to touch her belly, smiling at the soft kicks beneath her hand. "He's strong," she whispered one night. "Like you." Ethan brushed a kiss against her forehead. "Like his mother," he said. Still, worry gnawed at him. He began checking the traps farther from the lodge, reinforcing the doors, stacking more firewood than usual. "You expect trouble?" Claire asked. "Just being careful," he replied, but his tone betrayed him. There was something in his eyes, a shadow of memory, the echo of loss he'd sworn never to feel again. The snow thickened, blanketing the forest in silence. From afar, two figures trudged upward through the whiteness, bent beneath packs heavy with intent. Evelyn's breath came ragged, her eyes fixed on the faint trail of smoke rising above the ridge. "Almost there," she whispered. Luke lagged behind, his every step slower, guilt clinging to him heavier than the snow. He could already see her face when the truth came out, the betrayal, the heartbreak. Still he kept walking. Behind them the valley vanished into storm. Ahead the mountain waited, patient, merciless, and ready to judge them all. But what awaited inside that cabin was not the fragile girl they sold, nor the broken man they imagined, and the mountain had its own way of settling debts. By the time the storm reached its peak, the mountain was a kingdom of white fury. Snow whirled like ash, and the wind screamed through the pines. Inside the cabin, Ethan moved with careful urgency, checking the locks, feeding the fire, glancing at Claire every few seconds. Her belly had dropped lower. The time was near. "It's starting," she whispered, gripping the table edge as a wave of pain bent her in half. Ethan dropped to her side, steadying her. "Breathe, sweetheart. I've got you." But under the howl of wind came another sound, faint, rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps, then a voice, muffled but sharp, cutting through the storm. "Claire!" Evelyn's cry carried rage and desperation in equal measure. "Open this door!" Ethan froze, disbelief flashing into fury. "No," he muttered. "Not now." Claire's eyes widened.
"She's here?"
He nodded once, grabbing his rifle. Through the frosted glass, two blurred figures loomed, one small and rigid, the other tall, hesitant. "Luke," Ethan whispered, recognizing the shape of the son who never fought back. Claire's breath hitched with another contraction. "Ethan, please don't hurt them." He hesitated, torn between love and protection. "I won't if they give us peace." But the pounding started again, harder this time. "She's mine!" Evelyn shrieked. "You tricked her, you monster. That baby belongs to us." Lightning split the sky, and for a moment the scene outside flashed in stark clarity. Evelyn hammering the door with her fists, Luke beside her, face twisted with conflict. The blizzard raged around them, flakes blinding, howling like the mountain itself wanted them gone. Ethan shouted through the door, "You need to leave. There's nothing for you here." Evelyn screamed back, "You stole everything from me." Then, as if to punctuate her madness, a deep primal growl rose from the forest's edge. The same grizzly that haunted the ridge had returned, drawn by noise and scent. "Get inside!" Ethan yelled, but it was too late. The bear lunged from the dark, crashing against the porch. Evelyn shrieked. Luke stumbled back, firing a warning shot that vanished into the storm. Inside, the door shuddered under the bear's weight. The cabin trembled. Claire screamed as another contraction hit, the kind that promised there was no turning back. Ethan's instincts split in two. "Stay with me, Claire. "Don't move," he shouted, propping a beam against the latch. The bear's roar drowned out Evelyn's screams. He spun back to her, kneeling at her side. "We're doing this now," he said, his voice steady through the chaos. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I can't." "You can," he cut in, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You already survived hell. This is life calling you home." Outside, Luke dropped the rifle and threw himself at the door, using his body as a brace. "Go!" he yelled to Evelyn, who had fallen to her knees in the snow, sobbing and screaming at once. Inside, Ethan guided Claire through the storm of her own making, her cries joining the roar of wind and beast. "Push," he whispered. "I'm here." Claire gritted her teeth, every muscle trembling, until finally a thin, piercing cry rose above everything, clear, alive, defiant. The bear froze. The storm seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn's sobs fell silent. Ethan looked down, eyes wet, voice breaking. "It's a girl," he said. Claire laughed through her tears. "They said I couldn't, but I did." For a long, impossible moment the world went still. The wind softened. The fire steadied. Outside, Luke pressed his forehead to the door, tears freezing against his skin. "She did it," he whispered. Behind him, the bear turned and lumbered back into the trees, leaving nothing but silence and snow. Inside, Ethan wrapped the newborn in a quilt and laid her against Claire's chest. "You're safe," he whispered. "Both of you." Claire smiled weakly, eyes closing, as the baby's small fingers curled around hers. The mountain had chosen its truth, and for once it was mercy. But dawn would bring more than light. It would bring reckoning and redemption for the hearts left outside in the storm. When morning came, the mountain seemed reborn. The storm had spent itself, leaving the world quiet and silver under a rising sun. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, curling gently toward a sky scrubbed clean of clouds. Inside, the fire burned low, casting an amber glow over the small family huddled together. Claire slept with the baby against her chest, her face pale but peaceful, her breathing steady. Ethan sat beside her, eyes swollen from tears and sleeplessness, his hand never leaving hers. Every so often he'd glance at the newborn, a perfect, tiny girl wrapped in the quilt Claire had stitched, and smile like a man who'd seen a miracle with his own eyes. Outside, footprints littered the snow, some human, some clawed, all fading under the weight of dawn. Luke lay near the porch, bruised, exhausted, but alive. He stirred when sunlight touched his face, blinking up at the sky as if unsure whether he'd survived the night. Beside him, Evelyn sat slumped in the snow, coat torn, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The fury that had driven her up the mountain had burned itself out, leaving nothing but shame. She looked toward the cabin, smoke curling above it, like forgiveness she didn't deserve. "What have I done?" she whispered, voice shaking. Ethan opened the door quietly, rifle slung over his shoulder but lowered. The sight before him froze him mid-step, Evelyn shivering, Luke helping her to her feet. "You should have stayed in town," he said, his voice tired but not cruel. Evelyn turned, the steel in her eyes long gone. "I didn't come to hurt her," she rasped. "I came to take back what I thought I'd lost." Her gaze fell to the ground. "But she never belonged to me." "Not really." Ethan studied her a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," he said softly. "It's warmer inside." The words seemed to strike her harder than any accusation. She hesitated on the threshold, eyes darting to Claire, pale but smiling weakly from the bed. Claire's voice was hoarse but clear. "You don't have to stand there, Mother. There's room." Evelyn's lips trembled. "Claire..." The apology broke before it could form. Tears welled and froze on her cheeks. Slowly, she crossed the floor and knelt beside the bed. The sight of the child, her granddaughter, stole her breath. "She's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. Claire nodded, eyes soft. "Her name is Grace." For a long time no one spoke. The only sounds were the fire and the soft coo of the baby. Luke stood by the window staring at the thawing horizon. "The storm's ending," he murmured. "Maybe for good this time." Ethan looked down at him and extended a hand. "Stay a while," he said. "Help me build a fence strong enough to keep the wolves out next winter." Luke blinked, unsure how to accept forgiveness that easily, then nodded. "I'd like that." Evelyn remained by her daughter's side, hands trembling as she brushed a curl from Claire's forehead. "I don't deserve this," she said softly. Claire smiled through tears. "Neither did I. But mercy doesn't ask who's worthy." Outside, the snow began to drip from the roof, each drop a small, steady heartbeat of renewal. Inside, the cabin felt alive, not just with warmth, but with something greater: peace hard-earned, love unbroken, family remade. And for the first time in the history of Pine Ridge, the mountain kept a secret not of tragedy, but of grace. A full year had passed since that storm, and the mountain no longer felt like exile, it felt like home. Spring had painted Pine Ridge in colors so bright they almost hurt to look at. Wildflowers blanketed the slopes, and the scent of pine and rain filled the air. Birds nested in the eaves of the cabin, and laughter, pure, childlike laughter, now echoed through the clearing where silence once ruled. Grace, just learning to walk, stumbled through the grass in her tiny leather boots, giggling as she reached for the squirrel that darted between her mother's flower pots. Claire's laughter joined hers, rich and soft, the sound of a woman who had finally found peace. Ethan watched from the porch, arms crossed, a smile hidden beneath his beard. The man who once lived in solitude now carried an ease in his movements, a quiet confidence that came only from knowing you had something worth protecting. He had built a small wooden swing for Grace under the old cedar tree and carved the name Claremont into the arch above it, not as a claim of ownership but as a promise, a family reborn, not from bloodlines or titles, but from love and endurance. He joined Claire in the garden, kneeling beside her to pull a stubborn weed. She glanced at him, sunlight catching in her hair. "You're not supposed to be working," she teased. "You promised a rest day," he chuckled. "Resting is overrated. Besides, I like watching my wife boss me around." She leaned closer, brushing dirt from his cheek. "Your wife likes it too," she whispered and kissed him. Grace squealed with delight at the sight, clapping her tiny hands as if love itself were her favorite game. Ethan scooped the child up and spun her in the air until she shrieked with laughter. The sound echoed down the valley, carried by the wind like music. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, Luke appeared on the trail, older, calmer. His shoulders no longer hunched with guilt. He carried a basket of supplies from town, sugar, flour, and bright ribbons for Grace's hair. "Brought some news, too," he said, setting the basket down. "Your folks. They left Pine Ridge, moved closer to the city. Your mother sends word." Claire's expression softened, though her hands tightened around the basket. "What did she say?" Luke hesitated, then handed her a folded note. Claire opened it, her eyes scanning the uneven handwriting. It was short. "I see now that love grows strongest in places I never thought to look. If Grace ever asks about me, tell her grandmother loved her, even if she learned too late how to show it." Claire held the paper for a long time, tears welling. Not of pain, but release. "Maybe that's enough," she whispered. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his thumb brushing the tears from her cheek. "Sometimes peace isn't in forgetting," he said softly. "It's in forgiving." As evening settled, they sat together on the porch, Ethan carving a small wooden rattle, Claire nursing Grace, and Luke humming a tune his father used to sing. Fireflies began to flicker in the dusk, their glow dancing like tiny stars fallen to earth. The world was quiet again, but not empty. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of leaves carried a heartbeat, the steady rhythm of life continuing. When Grace finally fell asleep, Claire looked out toward the horizon where the valley met the sky. "Do you think they'll still talk about us down there?" she asked, half smiling. Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe, but I'd rather they tell our story the right way, and not of what was lost but of what was found." And so they did. In the years that followed, travelers through Pine Ridge would hear whispers of the woman who bloomed on the mountain, the barren girl who became a mother, the sold soul who found her freedom, and the man whose love turned a cabin of sorrow into a sanctuary of grace.